Anne Maguire, a lovable and dedicated teacher, had her life taken from her on April 28, 2014, while teaching a Spanish class at Corpus Christi Catholic College in Halton Moor, Leeds, England. William Cornick, who was 15 years old at the time of the murder, had been planning the attack for months. What could have pushed such a seemingly innocent child to severe measures like that? Welcome to Twisted Minds. My name is James, and today we will be taking a closer look at the case of William Cornick. By all accounts, he was a normal child until he snapped. In one of the most brutal stabbings ever seen by a child, Cornick managed to kill his teacher. Stick with us as we uncover the details of this killer. Will Cornick stands out, even in the short file labeled schoolboy killers. He came from a seemingly loving family, was intelligent, and excelled academically. Will Cornick's parents were divorced, yet they were both considered to be supportive. In year 7, he enrolled at Corpus Christi, the school where his former head of year regarded him as a pleasant boy who was always on time. He had only 5 instances of misbehavior in 4.5 years at the school and no criminal record prior to the murder. Even his classmates described him as talented, intellectually, and unlikely to cause trouble. So, what could have been the cause of his future savage behavior? There are some clues that could point to this. Cornick's personality had changed following a collapse while on vacation in Cornwall, after which he was diagnosed with diabetes. As a result of his condition, he had momentarily self-harmed. He was also disappointed in 2013 when he was unable to join the army owing to his diabetes. That Christmas, he posted a Facebook message to a buddy in which he discussed brutally murdering Maguire. Soon enough, he got tired of discussing it and decided to take action. On Monday, April 28, William Cornick arrived at Leeds Corpus Christi Catholic College loaded with several knives and a bottle of whiskey to celebrate the heinous act he was about to commit. Cornick had told other students that he planned to attack Mrs. Maguire the morning of the murder, and he had shown them several of the blades he had with him. He also warned students that he planned to attack other instructors, including a pregnant woman, in order to murder her unborn child. When the time came, Cornick left his class and entered Mrs. Maguire's classroom. He winked at a fellow student before attacking her. He spotted Mrs. Maguire at her desk, assisting students. She was leaning over, inspecting the work of a girl who had just finished her classwork. Cornick approached his teacher, armed with his weapon, and began stabbing her in the neck and back. One student later described the horrifying incident, saying he had no expression on his face when he stabbed her. Cornick came up behind Maguire and attacked her. Anne Maguire was 61 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, and of slender build. William Cornick stood a full foot taller and wielded a huge kitchen knife. To call his attack cowardly is an understatement. Mrs. Maguire fled, but the boy went after her. He kept stabbing her as she tried to flee. Susan Francis, Mrs. Maguire's friend and colleague, heard screaming and dashed to the corridor, where she discovered children crying in terror. Mrs. Maguire ran up to her friend, clutching her neck and crying, "He stabbed me in the neck." William Cornick was in hot pursuit, hoping to complete the task he had begun. Mrs. Francis shoved her friend into a workroom and leaned against the door to keep Cornick out. Cornick was visible via a glass panel in the door. He left with an expressionless face when he could not open the door. Even though the attack had ended, the news was far from good. Cornick had already caused significant injury. Mrs. Maguire's upper back and neck had been stabbed 7 times. Her jugular vein was the primary wound. The paramedics who arrived later said the stab wounds were the worst he had ever seen. Cornick returned to the seat in the classroom as if nothing had happened. He sat down near one of his classmates and confessed to stabbing Mrs. Maguire. He went on to say that it was a shame she wasn't dead. He described the encounter as a rush of excitement, even referring to it as good times. When retelling the facts to a prosecutor later, one girl said it was clear that he was delighted with what he had done. Anne Maguire and her husband Donald had 2 adult kids, the younger of whom is Royal Ballet soloist Emma Maguire. She'd spent her whole working life at Corpus Christi Catholic College, where she'd taught for 40 years and was about to retire in 5 months. On May 16, 2014, her funeral was held in the Church of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Cornick was initially incarcerated at Wetherby Young Offenders Institution near Leeds. But due to safety concerns, he was relocated to HM Prison, Hindley, near Wigan. Because of a technicality in British law, while it is illegal to name or identify Cornick during his trial because he was a child, it was legal to name him before the trial began. The following day, the tabloid newspaper The Sun named him. Upon examination, psychiatrists claimed Cornick had a profound lack of empathy for his victim and a degree of callousness rarely seen in clinical practice. They also said that he presents a danger of serious harm to the public. There is a high chance of homicidal violence, which might easily involve the use of a weapon. Cornick admitted that he had planned the murder and meant to carry it out 4 days earlier. His motives for the crime were simple. He had a burning hatred for Mrs. Maguire. He even asked his Facebook pals if they would murder Maguire for him if he paid them £10. Will Cornick had been plotting the murder for 3 years, according to the court, but neither his teachers nor his parents saw it coming. On the weekend before the murder, he attended his grandmother's birthday party and was polite and seemingly cheerful. Prosecutor Paul Greeny told Leeds Crown Court that Cornick's upbeat demeanor was one of the many remarkable elements of the case. Cornick was born into a good household. Despite their divorce, his parents, Ian and Michelle, were characterized as very responsible and caring people by one psychiatrist. Greeny described Will's family life as characterized by love and support. After only a few days of trial, the judge sentenced their son to 20 years in prison and complimented both parents for having the strength to sit in the dock with their son. Cornick shared a selfie on Facebook a few days before the incident, showing him with straight, shoulder-length brown hair covering his face. His hair had been cut into a shaggy crop by the time he appeared in court a few days after the attack, and he had bandages on one of his arms, which police said he received when fighting with school staff following the incident. In 2013, he was disappointed to learn that he would be unable to join the army due to medical concerns, and he began to express his hate for Maguire more and more. He exchanged communications to a pal on Facebook late on Christmas Eve 2013 and into the early hours of Christmas Day, in which he discussed brutally killing Maguire. At the time, he claimed to hear voices, a claim which he later told psychiatrists. It was promptly dismissed by experts in court. On February 24th that year, just over 2 months before the assassination, he wrote to a friend on Facebook, "The one absolute that deserves more than death, more than anguish, and more than anything that we can imagine." He had been placed in what they called internal isolation in schools a few weeks before after getting into problems with Maguire. Cornick had failed to do his Spanish homework, and as a result, she blocked him from going on a school bowling trip. He disobeyed her and went regardless. The boy later informed a doctor that 4 days before the crime he decided to murder Maguire rather than commit suicide. He stated that he finally decided on Friday after months of thinking how awful life is. He had never shown regret for his actions, telling one doctor that he was proud of what he had done. Here's what he said: "I wasn't in shock. I was delighted. I had a sense of pride. I still do. I know it's uncivilized, but I know it's incredibly instinctual and human. For past generations of life, killing has been a natural route of survival. It's either kill or be killed. I didn't have much of a choice." This chilling monologue showed everyone working the case at the time that there was to be no redemption for this child. He was made of pure evil, and that was that. His upbringing was unremarkable. He'd been living with his mother in a semi-detached house on a quiet cul-de-sac a mile from the school. Neighbors say that they were a peaceful family that did nothing out of the ordinary. These days, the blinds are closed all day, with only a swing ball set in the back garden to remind you that a teenager once lived there. His family was naturally mortified by what their son had done and heartbroken by the agony he had caused Maguire's family. They declined interviews and requested privacy as they tried to comprehend everything that happened. Their kid admitted to being a murderer, responsible for the death of a woman cherished by generations of students before him. It was a lot to take in. Mr. Greeny said, "The murder was committed in public, in front of many young people. The damage to those children remains to be seen, but it is not difficult to imagine." The court would be entitled to conclude that the defendant derived pleasure from the public nature of the killing. The sentence followed almost immediately after that. William Cornick was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in jail at Leeds Crown Court. He has never expressed regret for his acts. He knew the family would be angry, but in his exact words, he thought everything was fine and dandy. Other Western European countries allegedly would be less harsh. Yet, the penalty appears to be in line with charges for other UK children convicted of murder. Cornick's appeal against his sentence was denied in January 2015. An inquest into Anne Maguire's death was held in November 2017. Anne Maguire's family supported the inquest, but Yorkshire Police, Corpus Christi School, and Leeds City Council opposed it. The inquest questioned why Cornick's classmates did not report his plans to kill Maguire, or why he took a knife to school. It found that opportunities to prevent her murder were missing and delivered a verdict of unlawful killing. Mrs. Maguire was loved by her community. Following her terrible death, crowds gathered to pay their respects to the fallen hero. Pope Francis, Prime Minister David Cameron, and Frances Lawrence, widow of slain London head teacher Philip Lawrence, were among those who paid respect to Maguire. In the 1970s, author Anthony McGowan was a student of Maguire's at Corpus Christi. He wrote an article on her in The Telegraph, recalling how caring and attentive she was to her students. Anne was a hands-on, perceptive, instinctive teacher and leader. Her labor was always done with a warm grin and a giving spirit. This was matched with a fantastic capacity to inspire and motivate others. The students were aware of the great expectations placed on them, and Anne appealed to their better nature. She is definitely someone who will be missed by her family and the world at large. As for Will Cornick, he continues to think about his crime in prison. Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Minds. That was the case of William Cornick, and why don't you go ahead and click on one of the 2 videos on your screen for another one of our videos.